What's going on, guys, and welcome back to the channel. If you are new here, consider hitting that subscribe button. We're going to jump right on into our Banlist prediction. This one may be a little more wish listy than typical. Usually I try to keep it pretty realistic, which I did still try to do, but I think this is something that they could do to actually really help the format out, to help push new decks, to help push new product, to help just change up the game, because I think a lot of us are tired of the same old. So I think a lot of this makes sense. I'll talk about some other points as we go on through it, but without further ado, we are going to jump into it. I do think, when do we get it? You know, if we stick to the schedule, end of August, early September. However, if we get it early, it makes a lot of sense, because this weekend is Worlds, and then the weekend of the 12th, regionals start back up. So it'd make perfect sense if we got it like next week, Monday, Tuesday, and got a new list before regionals for the new season, start fresh, reset the format. But it's Konami, so will they do that? Probably not. We're going to start out with the elephant in the room. We're going to go deck by deck a little bit in the beginning and talk about why we hit these cards and put cards where. Kashtira. What do I think is going to happen to Kashtira? If we look at the last two formats, Kashtira took 24% of all top cut last format and 34% of the format prior to that. So we definitely need to hit them again. I think this is the time they come hard for Kashtira. Arise Heart's going to get banned. It's Trident, but way better. And Trident is banned. We all know that. Limited, I think Unicorn goes from 2 down to 1 just to hit that consistency even harder. And then I was really debating here on, do we hit Fenrir? Does Fenrir go to 2? Does Fenrir go to 1? What happens to Fenrir? I actually ended up leaving Fenrir off, and I think it makes more sense to put Birth to 1. As someone who played Kashtira for the last two formats, I think Birth is the more broken card. And like a pattern you'll see throughout this prediction, I think that Konami has a chance to really hit these decks and check these decks while keeping those chase cards, the ulties like Fenrir, like Branded Fusion, Hint Hint, untouched, to keep their value and keep the desire to chase after them there. And I think they can hit these decks without touching those cards. So if we leave Fenrir alone, but we put Unicorn and Birth to 1 and we get rid of Arise Heart completely, I think maybe Kashtira sticks around as an engine. However, as a standalone deck, Kashtira isn't going to be a thing anymore, because we also have some indirect hits that we're going to talk about. You may notice there's no semi-limited section. That's because I don't think any cards are going to go semi-limit. There'll be some card that comes back to 2. But as far as getting hit to 2, I don't think there's any card that's going to be, so I left that section off the list. If these 3 hits happen to Kashtira, I would be pretty happy overall. Like I said, I think as an engine, the deck would still see some play, but as a whole, the deck would not be a pure build in any sense anymore. At least not any good with 1 Birth and 1 Unicorn, no Arise Heart. Runic, this one I don't have the percentages exactly on, because it was played as an engine, not necessarily a standalone deck. Whether it's in Spright, Naturia, Plunder Patrol, the Fur Hire, or other decks, Runic needs some type of hit. And personally, I think Runic Tip should go to 1. And then I was really debating, is that enough? Do we just leave it at Runic Tip to 1? Or do we hit something like Fountain or Hugin, one of the two, to 1 as well? If you hit Fountain or Hugin and tip both to 1, I think the engine is still useful, because you have all the strong cards with their effects. However, the broken ones of searching anything and drawing 3 on both players' turn take the hits and aren't as consistent as they were. Also, putting Fountain to 1 kind of makes a second Hugin redundant, because you lost your 1 Fountain. So at that point, it's kind of like, you know, Fountain to 1, if you out it, it's gone. So maybe that's too harsh too, because if you put Hugin to 1, at least then you can, you know, how Hugin will go back to the extra deck depending how it leaves the field, so then you could potentially summon it again to search out that second fountain. So I could see Hugin to 1, but I think like Tip and Fountain to 1 would be plenty to hit the Runic engine, because it is just very strong. And if we're truly trying to clean up the format, isn't a whole archetype that says banish your opponent's deck not necessarily that healthy for the game? It's not as bad as Kashtira, where they banish face down, but still banishing your opponent's deck is not fun. Moving on to Branded, we're going to get rid of Gimmick Puppet. I think people are going to say, well, there's still DD Orthros, there's still Ross Disciple, and true, but the reason that this is just so consistent and easy for them to do still is because Granganul can dump this to the graveyard, whereas it can't with the other cards. And then they just obviously use their normal combo, Sanctifier Dragon, summon it back. The only way to truly get rid of all that would be to ban Sanctifier Dragon, which I would be okay with. I just don't think it's going to happen. Many people will say that it's a fair deck, it doesn't need to be hit more than that, just hit the toxic part. Personally, I think that they should get some type of consistency hit, because they've been around for absolutely so long. And again, we're trying to freshen up the format, freshen up things, and really push players into playing new decks. So the best way to do that is to hit the current decks, because Konami is a business at the end of the day. I think a consistency hit of like Albion or Branded Opening to 1 would actually be pretty good. Albion to 1 could actually be kind of interesting, like the original Albion, the red one. But I don't really see that happening. It would be interesting, because then they get it kind of that one time, and then they got to play a little differently to get their grind game going. So I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but I think opening your Albion to 1 makes the most sense as just a consistency hit. We hit the toxic part, we hit a consistency hit, and then we move on with our lives. Another deck that is just so fair, so why do we hit it? Especially if we're hitting the Runic engine, and you probably know already, it's a deck that took up 19% of the top cut last format and 6% prior. Keep in mind, Super Heavy Samurai was a thing, and Pearly and mathmech, so that was part of why some decks percentages were much lower. But Spright Jet to 1. Originally I was going to have a second hit here, like Starter to 1. But again, I think the deck is actually pretty fair, and it's more or less, it's been out for a year. It's been basically a contender for a year. We got to hit it somehow, for the same reason that we're hitting Branded's consistency, that we're a business and we want to push new product. We want to get players to play new things, so we got to hit the old things. And that's why Jet to 1 I feel like actually makes kind of sense. With Jet to 1 and Starter at 2, I think Pure can still see play. I just don't know how well it will do, because even last format we saw, it may have topped 19%, but they only won like 1 or 2 events. Like, their win rate was not very high. The deck was very good at topping, but not very good at winning. And if it takes another hit, I don't know if Pure really will stand alone and be able to keep doing that. Obviously, Runic being hit too will hurt it. There's still for hire cards that we're not going to touch on this list, as a little hint. Evil Twin, we're not going to touch them on this list. So I mean, there's still things you can do. Gishki, Sprite is just such a splashable engine, and I think that's a fair thing to be for it. Dragon Link. Should we hit Dragon Link? I think we should. They had 9% of the tops last format. They really came on strong towards the end of the format prior, where they didn't start out doing anything, but they did end up pulling in 3% of the total tops. You might say 3% is not very good, but overall it's actually not that bad. Bestial Magnemite though, like, everyone knows this card eventually is going to go to 1, and on top of being like a Dragon Link card, extender, crazy, the fact that it searches again during the end phase is just really, really good. It's basically 2 Bestials, 2 hand traps, 2 bodies on board. It's combo for dragons all on their own. Like, they go second, you go first, and you hard lose to Bestials. If they drop Magnemite on you, you already lost the game, because then they're going to search out full combo in the end phase. And like I said, you just lose the game at that point. I think Bastille to 1 is the best way to do some type of a hit to Dragon Link. One final deck. I don't see a lot of people touching this deck, but personally I think they should. It's had just over 6% of tops over the last 2 formats in each. I think Labyrinth needs a direct hit. They're very consistent, they're very recursive, they're very strong, and I know the new support's quite a ways out, so I don't necessarily want to use that as my reason for hitting it. I just feel that they topped quite a bit and they were winning quite a few events. That Labyrinth definitely has proven itself to be a very strong deck and proven that it can take a hit. So let's give it the treatment of these other decks, like when we hit Elf, when we hit Expulsion, when we hit, a Rise Heart to 1. When we hit these other decks and you make them prove that they deserve to be at the top, I think Labyrinth takes a hit like that, and Big Welcome to 1 makes perfect sense. So these are kind of the 5 decks plus the Runic Engine that we're touching to curb the current format a little bit. These are it for the, like I said, direct hits. We have a few generic hits that we'll talk about in a second. And you might say, why these decks specifically? If you look at last format, these were the top 5 decks. No decks outperformed these 5 decks. That was a big part of why I decided to try to, kind of like I said, take the top of the format and cut the head off of it, or at least push it down a little bit. And if we go back 2 formats, all 5 of these decks were in the top 8. Do you know what the other 3 were? Super Heavy Samurai, mathmech, and Pearly. We all know what happened to those 3 decks. Pearly, however, did get more support and is going to be a tier 1 contender now in the new format, but they're a new deck, that's fine. And mathmech actually proved to stick around. A card that isn't going to be on here but could get mentioned is Super Heavy Samurai Scarecrow. I think it has a decent chance to come back to 1, honestly. We've seen Konami hit cards and then unhit them on the very next list. I think Scarecrow is one of those cards because the deck became virtually unplayable. Maybe if we just hit all these decks enough like this, maybe that will push Super Heavy back into the picture because other decks get hit, so then players will pick up decks like that, or we just give them the 1 Scarecrow back and we'll see what happens. Additionally, Naturia Sacred Tree also I could see coming back to 3. They hit it to 1 and Naturia just absolutely died. If we're hitting the Runic Engine, Sacred Tree could probably come back to 3 and be completely fine. So we're not going to have them on here as far as visuals, but Scarecrow and Sacred Tree absolutely could come back to 1 and to 2. A couple more generic hits. We have Eradicator. Everyone is calling for the card. It's not fun. It is not interactive. It's not fun to watch. Is it interesting? Kind of, because it's not even guaranteed. Like, me personally, when it seems like I use Eradicator, I hit a handful of monsters. But even in that case, you still gain full hand knowledge and you know how to play your board. And just sometimes knowing your opponent's hand means you know how to play your interactions, and you just win the game because of that, because you don't have to guess or be like, okay, this is a choke point, I'm going to wait for this. It's, oh, I know this is their hand, if I hit this they can't play, so they lose. And just gaining that hand knowledge on top of being able to see their next couple draws and destroying all their spells or traps, it's just insane. Finally, D-Shifter, our final banned card for today. Not a whole lot to say here. Shifter warps formats. Shifter completely cuckolds other decks. Shifter makes so many strategies just unplayable, and it was fine when rogue decks used Shifter to stay relevant. It was fine when tier 2 decks like Flunder played Shifter to help push them into an anti-meta conversation. It's not fine when you have all these tier 1 decks playing Shifter. I think that is what truly made Shifter get broken. We hit Gamma, and I think Shifter was more of a problem than Gamma, so it's time that we hit Shifter. Prosperity being the final hit we're going to do. Prosperity to 1. Like, I've called this for a few lists. I've seen so many more people finally talking about it. This card is broken. This card is insane. Look at 6 cards, grab 1, add it to your hand. Some decks even benefit from the extra deck getting banished. Obviously, we're hitting Kashtira now, but still, like, it just changes future card design. It's insane. Games 2 and 3, it's ridiculous. Like, you get decks like Tri-Brigade where they used to thin their deck so much they basically searched out IO with this card, and it's just going to be a problem forever being able to dig that deep into your deck and just grab whatever card you want. A couple cards we're going to put back to 1, Heart Horror and Zen Mighty. I don't think anyone would argue that either one of these cannot come back. It is long overdue for both of them. I think Heart personally could come back to 3 and it wouldn't see any issues. However, I see him putting it to 1 first, and I finally, truly, honestly think it's probably not going to happen. I lost all hope for this to happen, but it should. Miscellaneosaurus to 2. Dinos have still done nothing. Dinos still hard lose to so many cards. It's insane. Dinos need something. Their new support was not it. Their new support was good. Their new support was borderline great, but their new support didn't really change a whole lot. They're still so fragile. Miscellaneosaurus to 2 may help that out. Some cards back to 3. Gazelle, Orange Light, Archfiend, Spellbook of Judgment, and Ancient Fairy Dragon. We're getting the new support, so maybe they don't do this. However, we're getting the new support, so maybe they do. On top of that, what has Salamangreat done in, ever? And people want to talk about Engage back to 3. We have 2 Engage, and yet Gazelle is at 1 and Harporer is at 0. But we have 2 Engage. Engage is infinitely the better card of them. Sky Striker is the deck that has done way more than them. It's just insane how much Konami loves their Sky Striker. Orange Light, I don't think there's any reason this card can't come back. Would Tier Laments play it? Probably not. Not with all the Shizu cards at 1. Drytron could play it. It could help Drytron out. I don't know. It's a -1 on the surface. Not many decks are going to plus off of it. It's just a strong card for decks to have. I think that it's very good. It's very strong. However, I don't think there's any reason it can't come back to 3. Infernity Archfiend, I called it last list too, and I was wrong. I think that there's no reason this can't come back. Honestly, I could even see the spell coming back to 3. Personally, I don't think Infernities are going to do anything. The biggest thing I could see holding back Infernity and Salamangreat and even Miscellaneosaurus here, and potentially Harporer from coming back, is the whole Despia and Spright argument where we're trying to push new decks. So why release these types of things? I could see that, honestly. However, I am going to put them still here, but since we're saying we are hitting these cards to push new decks, but we're bringing back these old decks, it does conflict a little bit. But I'm going to leave them there. However, I wouldn't be surprised for that reason if we don't. Spellbook of Judgment, I mean, people were like, either, oh, it's about time, or they can't do that, it's going to be crazy. Kind of like Danglong. And what has Judgment done since coming back? What has Danglong done since coming back? Absolutely nothing. Ancient Fairy Dragon, errated hard ones per turn, 3 copies. Who's going to play 3 copies? Nobody's going to play 3 copies. And that's pretty much it. Let me know down below what you think about this prediction. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it copium? Should they do it? Should they not do it? Did we miss anything? Did we not miss anything? 2 other cards I do want to mention very quickly before we end the video. Triple Tactic Talent I could see getting hit. I thought about it hard. I was going to put it on here, and then I decided not to. I just got this feeling it's not going to get hit, but if Talent goes to 1, I would not be surprised at all. And Dimension Barrier, I think it stays. I think that it's one of those cards that is just a necessary evil to counter so many different strategies. I think that it sticks around, and whether you love it or you hate it, or you love to hate it, I think D-Barrier is going to stay around. But anyway, guys, thanks for watching, and until next time, take care.